I'm Alan Arnold, and this session, session 2, is about the wildness of creating with God. Now, in the first session, we talked a little bit about what the invitation is. In this session, I want to talk to you about how do we actually do it? What does it look like? Stepping into creativity with God, because it can sound a little bit surreal or mystical, and the problem with that is if we don't know what to do, then we're not sure if we're doing it, or if it's what it's supposed to be, or how it might look. So I'm going to try to find some ways to show you that today. First, I want to offer you a new definition of creativity. It's one that I think applies to everything we're talking about, and it's a way you can ask yourself and just kind of think about your creativity. So this new definition is this: creativity is bringing something new into existence through our presence and our gifting. And I'll repeat this: that changes the atmosphere. So creativity is bringing something new into existence through our presence and gifting that changes the atmosphere. And we do that with God. It's the way He created in Genesis. In the Creation Act, it's not just what He brought into existence, it's who He is. His presence, His personality is reflected in creation. If you want to know a creator, you look at what they create. So you can watch a show on HBO or Netflix, or you can listen to a song, and you may not know that person who created it, but you'll know a lot about them through their creativity. You'll know their view of sex, maybe, of life and death, of morality, of dreams, of the heart. You'll pick up those things, not just because it's in the story, but because it reveals the storyteller. And here's the thing. We spend our days, by and large, either believing life is up to us or experiencing the wildness of life with God. It's really one of those two options. And we get to choose which reality we call home. But it's hard to have one foot in both worlds. What we choose is revealed by how we create. So if you're not sure, we'll go into that in this session with what it looks like. Because I'm going to give you 4 ways to look at your creativity with God. What is it like? When Jesus taught, He taught in parables. The kingdom of heaven is like. It's like this. It's like a coin. It's like a lost sheep. It's like this setting. It's like this situation. It's like this person. He did that because if He had just said, have you ever thought about this? If He just said, the kingdom of heaven actually is, probably people's heads would have started exploding. Because they don't even have language for it. They can't even see in 7D or whatever it would be. They don't even know those colors. They don't even understand the depth of what it could be. So He would explain, it's like this, it's kind of like this, it's kind of like that. Well, we're in a deep topic with creativity and how to create with God. So what does creating with God look like? Well, it involves identity. So the first thing that creating with God is it involves your identity. One way to say it and think about it is, who would you be if the world didn't tell you who you are? Your identity is not what you do, it's who you are. And when you know who you are, that identity influences everything. Our creative gifting can become an idol when we don't know who we are and we look at it as our validation, or if it becomes our primary identity. I'll tell authors all the time, it's great that you're an author, it's great that you just got a contract, it's great that you just got a bestseller, but you're not, at your core, a New York Times bestselling author. You're not even at your core a new author. At your core, back to session 1, you're a son or daughter of God. The problem is when we start defining ourselves by being an author or a creative writer, or whatever the thing we do is that it can be taken away. We can lose it. And then who are we? So you don't want your gifting to become your label for yourself. It is what you do, but it's not your primary identity. And a lot of times we forget who we are in the larger story we're in, so we start going for sub-labels. We start going for other ways to identify ourselves than our core identity. And again, as Creator and Father, God invites us to pursue what we love as sons and daughters. So as you go to create each morning, each day, one thing I found really helpful is to start by saying, okay, God, we get to do this together. I'm your daughter, I'm your son, and we are entering into this, whatever this is for you, together. When I came out here, I pull my truck out of the garage in the driveway, and literally before I get out of the driveway this morning, I'm saying, okay, God, here we go. It's a road trip. We're going into this. I don't know what it's going to be like. I've never done this before in this setting with you. So we're going to take this road trip together. We're going to do this together. And it's seeing life as entering into your passion, your gifting, as a road trip, as a time with God in a very intimate way. Another way to say it in the story of what I say is identity never hinges on what you do, but is unconditionally based on who you are. This is immense because if you don't have this foundation, then other things start to unravel later in your creative calling. The second way is expectancy. Now, there's a world of difference between the terms expectations and expectancy, and I just want to spend a minute on that. Think about expectations first. Expectations are your list of things that need to go a certain way in order for your day to go a certain way. So your expectation may be, I'm writing something and I want it to be out by the end of this year. Or I want 20,000 followers in social media, whatever that social media platform is. Or I want to get a book contract, or I want an agent, or I want, and fill in the blank. Those could be called goals, but goals can quickly become expectations. And I used to have, there was a season in my life where I had about 8 things that I wanted to happen every day. And if they didn't, then when I came home and my wife asked me, how was my day? I'd tell her I had a bad day. And if they all happened, I had a phenomenal day. And that was my measurement. And it was the smallest story type things. Did I go to the gym? Did I read the newspaper? Did I, close a deal at work? Things that had an importance level on some degree, but they were expectations, and God didn't have to show up for any of those things to happen. And if God doesn't have to show up for your expectations, you're putting control over your day in a very dangerous place if it doesn't involve Him showing up or not showing up, but just your goals or expectations happening. But imagine, your art in your life, how it can soar when you shift to expectancy. It takes this baggage off. When you live a life of expectancy, it's waking up saying, okay, Father, what are we going to do today? What do you have for me today? In my life, yes, but specifically too, in my gifting. When you sit down to write, it may look like God saying, actually, get up, we're going to go walk around the block right now. Actually, I want you to go to see this movie that just came out. Yeah, God, but I really need to get this project done. And He says, no, I want you to go play with your child. I want you to go have that conversation with your spouse. It's an expectancy and a wonder of not knowing what's coming next, but walking through, even in your gifting, even when you only have an hour, walking through that with God in an expectant way, but without locked-in expectations. It's basically wonder, a sense of wonder for what God is up to in your story, the one you're living and writing. What is God up to today in my creativity? What is He up to in my story? And then stepping into that. The cool thing about this is disruptions no longer feel like disruptions in your life because you're expectant that God is in those disruptions. So even when something normally you'd think, I don't have time for this. Now this is really cool. God's doing something here. I just need to figure out what it is. I need to ask him. I need to see it that way. It's less about how God will use your gift or your story than how the two of you enter into it together. It shifts from a functionality mindset to a relational mindset in everything. The third is intimacy. Now, I'm going to show you this video. It's with my youngest son, Chase. We were, a few summers ago, at this place I work called The Outpost. And I brought him there in the summer to play games and have fun. And we actually did very little of that. I got called in some meetings. It was a rare day where it was far busier than I thought. And so I was in the truck with him at the end of the day. I was disappointed. I felt like a failure as a dad. And I was talking to him, and I just happened to sense God's nudge and say, just turn on your iPhone. Just capture this. It's about 1 minute. But watch what we talk. We're talking here about the day, and listen to his words.
I don't care what we're doing if it's with you.
How come?
Because it's with you.
What if it's like doing cleaning out the garbage bin? What if it's flying to Mars and killing aliens?
Mm-hmm.
What if it's
That'd be actually kind of fun.
what if it's playing foosball and winning again? That'd be fun.
Mm-hmm.
So just anything that we do together.
Even if it's losing on foosball against girls.
Even losing?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Still fun.
we're doing it together.
Uh-huh.
Awesome. Hey Chase, I love you.
Love you too.
This saying here, I don't care what we do as long as we do it together. That's, I hope, our heart posture toward God as his son or daughter. Whatever you want to do, God, I'm in. When Chase was this age, he's a few years older now. When he was this age, anytime I got in my truck, he would want to get in. And he would want to flip, I would flip the console. It's a big truck. He'd sit like leg touching leg, arm touching arm. And he was in for the ride. He didn't ask if I had enough money for where we were going. He didn't ask if I knew directions. He didn't ask if he could get something. He wanted the presence. He wanted just to be together. It was an intimacy that wasn't dependent on what he got or the outcome of the trip. Do we have that posture with God? As we grow older, it becomes a little more of, okay, God, I sense you're telling me to do this, but how am I going to pay the bills if I do this? Or I sense you're nudging me to this, but what are people going to think? Or can you guarantee it'll be success? Or if we move across the country, will we have friends just as good as we had before? There's all these questions that aren't bad, but there's an innocence about intimacy that says, God, if you're in this, I'm in. I'm in. Let's go. Let's do it. In Exodus, Moses says about the same thing in different words, but basically, if you remember in Exodus 33, he's, in a sense, kind of negotiating or struggling with God about this journey into the wilderness. And he says, if you're not in it, let's call the whole thing off. In other words, I'll go if you're with me, but only if we do this together. And that's the intimacy I'm talking about in our creativity. Should you take on the next project? Should you sign a 3-book contract? I don't know. What does God say? Well, surely God would want me to sign a 3-book contract if I'm a writer and it's a good advance because that pays the bills and that gives me security in what I'm doing. Maybe, but ask God. He might surprise you. It's the intimacy of every aspect of your gifting. The bottom line, though, is we're not alone, which means it's not all up to us. And that's a huge shift. A lot of people think their creativity, especially if you're a writer, involves you being alone. And you do kind of have to get somewhere quiet to write. I get it. But you're not doing it alone. You're doing it in intimacy with God. If you think about it this way, God is the best storyteller there is. He could have written the Bible, had the Bible put together any way he wanted, and it's largely a story. And it's a story largely because our lives are stories. And creativity plays best as a story. So we get to let him expand our imagination. We invite him into the creative process to do it together. So what does this intimate, active dance of co-creating look like? Well, I'm going to show you a scene from a movie now called August Rush. Don't know how many of you have seen that. A couple have, but in it, there's a boy who, he doesn't know who his parents are, and his parents are super creative. His dad's a guitar player. The son is a young son now, is playing the guitar. He's on the street, largely, and doesn't know who his parents are. And in this scene, his dad comes up to him, but father and son don't know who each other are fully. And watch how the creative process plays out in this scene. There's very few words. Did you like that scene? So let me ask you a question. Whose song were they playing? His or the boys? Theirs. Right. It was theirs. There was a blurring and a blending at the end where it wasn't really one or the other. But the father came in and invited the son into something new. And he didn't just invite him into it, he switched guitars. He gave him the better guitar. And he said, now try this. And he took the son's guitar and he goes, this is pretty cool. But his was a lot cooler. The dad's was a lot cooler. But he's pouring into the son, he's engaging him, he's inviting him into co-creation. Does your writing look like that scene? When you sit down, whether you're typing on a keyboard, whether you're thinking and dreaming, imagining what could be, do you sense God's active presence in the process like that? That's a picture I want you to hold for the co-creation process. In Jeremiah 33:3, God tells us, call to me and I will answer. Most of us are familiar with that verse, but the next part we kind of forget. I will show you great things you cannot know on your own. In other words, you want to know great and mighty things? You have to do it with me. You have to do it together. I'll show you if you'll get in my truck and not ask me where we're going and not ask me if I have enough money or when we'll be home. I'll show you. If you'll do it with me, together. I'll show you creative ideas you'll never dream up on your own. I'll show you solutions to that problem in your manuscript. I'll show you ideas that people need that you won't figure out on your own, if you'll do it with me. The fourth aspect of what creating with God looks like is an awakened heart. For art to stir the hearts of others, it must first make the artist's heart beat faster. If you are bored with the story you're creating, work on it and fix it or let it go, but it needs to make your heart beat faster first. Fiction, nonfiction, poetry, whatever you're creating, it needs to excite you and make your heart beat faster. I really believe there's nothing that's ever been created in terms of great art without a passionate heart of the creator. When God stepped into creation, how passionate was he about creation? In the Passion Translation, in the book of Proverbs, there's this great scene, and it's in Proverbs 8, and it's personifying Lady Wisdom. And let me just read to you a little bit about this, of the creation act from this viewpoint. In the beginning, I was there. For God possessed me. Even before he created the universe from eternity past, I was set in place. Before the world began, I was anointed from the beginning, before the ocean depths were poured out, and before there were any glorious fountains overflowing with water, I was there dancing. Even before one mountain had been sculpted or one hill raised up, I was already there dancing. When he created the earth, the fields, even the first atoms of dust, I was already there. When he hung the tapestry of the heavens and stretched out the horizons of the earth, when the clouds and skies were set in place and the subterranean fountains began to flow strong, I was already there. When he set in place the pillars of the earth and spoke the decrees of the seas, commanding the waves so they wouldn't overlap their boundary, I was there, close to the Creator's side as his master artist. Daily, he was filled with delight in me as I playfully rejoiced before him. I laughed and played, so happy with what he had made. Dancing, playing, clapping, celebrating. God is a wild creator, and he wants our wildness in the creative process. He's not the stern teacher. He's the playful creator when it comes to us and our gifts. He's the one saying, yeah, do that. And when he's creating, I think he loved in this personification of the scene, he would love people dancing, going, that's awesome, you did that? I want to come closer to you. I want to clap. I want to dance. This is amazing. That's our creator. You know, what's interesting is this. Jesus' mission is to heal shattered hearts and set us free, right? In Isaiah 61, when he was asked in the New Testament, what is your mission, Jesus? He goes back to Isaiah and he says, here's why I came. I didn't come so you would get your act together, primarily. I didn't come because you've just messed everything up and I'm really irritated. I came to heal shattered hearts and set you free. And there's this Japanese art form, I don't know if you've heard of, called kintsugi. And kintsugi takes broken, shattered plates, vases, cups, and what it does is it takes this liquid gold and infuses the broken places with liquid gold and puts it back together and makes it one of a kind. And that one of a kind piece then is actually valued more than the original before it broke, because now there's nothing like it and it's laced with gold and it's beautiful. And kintsugi, and the way it does that, that's what Jesus does. He comes and he says, I'm not just putting your heart back together with super glue and Band-Aids. I'm giving you a new heart. It's better than it was before. And then when we have that heart, he tells us now, above everything, guard it, nurture it, protect your heart. Proverbs 4:23. As a creative force, you will not go far if your heart is numb. If you are living in a way in your own life that's checked out, numb, glazed over, burnt out on a consistent basis, it's almost impossible to fathom you breathing life into a book, a story, a creation. I had a good friend years ago here in Colorado who was working on a book project, and the friend invited me over and wanted to celebrate because the manuscript was finally finished, finally done. But this author had been working on it for the last part of it for weeks and was burnt out. He was on his 12th cup of coffee, I think, when I got over. His eyes were baggy. He was a little irritable. And he asked me if I wanted to read the manuscript. And my answer, I knew him well enough to say, hey, listen, I'm sure it's theologically correct. I'm sure it's good content. But no, I don't think I do, because the way you've given birth to this doesn't feel like it's going to have much life in it. We are the ones who give birth to something when we create. It matters the state of our heart, the state of our being. It's not enough just to go, I've created this thing, judge this thing. We're the one who gives birth to it. And in the birthing process, if a woman were smoking and drinking and not taking care of the baby in her womb, the baby's not going to come out very healthy. It matters how a story is born. And our heart is the key to that. So to wrap it up, just remember this is initiation. And initiation is going to feel impossible at times. If it didn't, it wouldn't be initiation. In Matthew 19:26, there's this scene where Jesus looks at the disciples intently and he says, humanly speaking, this is impossible. And yet with God, all things are possible. Initiation will feel like things are impossible. That's not really a bad thing. That's part of initiation. It stretches you. It pulls you beyond yourself, and we want to be beyond ourselves when we're creating. But with God, with being the key word, all things are possible. So together with God, we get to do the impossible. And our art can change the atmosphere. It can change the world around us. But it starts with how we create. And the beginning of that is always with God. That's where we get our identity, our intimacy. That's where our heart awakens. And that's where our ideas can come from.